Welcome back to the secret world of human trafficking. I'm your host, David J. Story, and I'm also the author of the Omega book series. This interview features Annie P. Mitchell, an attorney, law professor, and about her involvement in the researching and publishing documents related to the Jeffrey Epstein case. Well, I want to welcome Annie Mitchell to our show today. And Annie, why don't you go ahead and give us a little background on yourself and how you got involved in the Epstein file.
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me, David. It's a real pleasure. I am an attorney. I am a law professor and law dean emeritus. And how I got involved is almost by accident. In January of 2025, right when Trump 2 started, I noticed there was just this massive amount of misinformation going on around what the administration was doing, the ICE actions, and it was bad enough. The truth and the facts are bad enough. It didn't need misinformation to sort of whip people into an hysteria. And so I started just seeing this need for someone with my background who understood what was going on in the courts and the legal actions to explain in plain English, the facts and to dispel the misinformation. And because people need knowledge if they are going to try to fight whatever is going on, right? It's to their benefit to have people scared and confused and discombobulated, because a confused populace is a weak populace, right? There is strength in knowledge and facts. So anyway, I started posting on social media and I gained quite a following because people are hungry for that. They really want to know the reality. And at the same time, the stories about Epstein and the actions and the victims coming forward were becoming also more, the public was becoming more aware of them. And they started asking me, well, what about this? And what about this lawsuit against this Epstein, against Maxwell? And so I sort of just fell into also being someone that people came to for Epstein information. And in the context of that, I started doing research. And when the files dropped, the first thing I did was I grabbed every file that was dropped and immediately stored it away in a private Dropbox, because I knew that the DOJ would start pulling stuff back. And they did. Excuse me. And so that, of course, got me even more involved, because now I was handling the files and I was seeing what was in the files. And that basically is how I got involved with the Epstein stuff.
I'm sure you've seen a lot of stuff in those files that were shocking.
I have. A lot of what I do is looking at the legal aspect. So, fortunately, I'm not always seeing, I'm seeing a lot of victim statements. And in fact, I have put out a series of, I actually found police reports, the testimony of several of the victims that were unredacted and were produced during the police investigation, during the first investigation that led up to his first arrest in Florida. And so I've been very, it sounds weird to say fortunate, but I've been fortunate in as much as having access to that information and finding these things and then putting them out for the public. And so, for example, with those, there were, I think, 6 to 7 different girls/women who were giving sworn testimony to the police. And I had all of those, and I released them redacted. I redacted the names of the victims because, that's what you do. But I did not redact any, like I didn't redact Epstein's name, I didn't redact Sarah Callan's name. I didn't redact any of that, and I released them one at a time because it was showing people what this actually was doing was the police building their case to ultimately get the warrant, which I also released, to basically do a sting on Epstein. So those are the kinds of things that I found and have had access to that the general public may not have. So that's how I got involved. I just started doing that sort of thing because, as you well know, I'm sure, once you start looking into something like this, you can't walk away from it. Once you know, then you have to act.
Exactly. You mentioned that you have a following and all of that. You have a podcast or a show that you do?
So what I started doing, originally I was just posting primarily on Facebook, posting these posts explaining to people the reality of what was going on. Again, not just with Epstein, but, for lawsuits that were happening. A lot of things of the misinformation out there, with regard to all of it, is that, and even now, well, the courts don't matter because they're just ignoring court orders. The administration, doesn't follow court orders. Well, that's actually not true. It turns out that other than a handful of cases in the very beginning, a handful of immigration cases, the administration overwhelmingly is following all the court orders. Now, they appeal them, and sometimes the orders get stayed. That means they get paused while the appeal is happening. So that may seem like they're not following the court order, but they actually are following them. And so again, I start, and then I would explain what was going on in a given lawsuit. Because again, the misinformation, and to be clear, it serves the purpose of both fringe sides, if you will, the right and the left, whatever you want to call them. They both are guilty of putting out, on the fringe, of putting out misinformation, because the same misinformation serves the purpose for both of them, which is keeping the populace confused, keeping the populace kind of in the dark, keeping them whipped up into a sky is falling hysteria, because again, then they're not strong. They can't really come together and act. So yeah, I started putting out those posts explaining the reality, the facts and the truth, and people started coming to me. And then I was, I'm on Threads as well, and I have like 300,000 followers there. And eventually posting this, I was like, I just need to put out a publication. So I started something that I call Notes from the Front, which is from the front lines of the legal battle to save the soul of our democracy. And I published that on Substack.
Okay.
Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Now, how do our listeners find you?
The easiest way to find me is to go to notesfromthefront.fyi. So it's not .com, it's .fyi, notesfromthefront.fyi. And it'll take them there. Thank you for asking that.
Oh, no problem. I'll put that in the notes and everything later on. You mentioned, when we first communicated about the underage girls, more of a multi-level marketing. I mean, that was a little confusing to me. What can you clarify that? What you meant by
Absolutely.
that?
And in fact, that became crystal clear to me during my investigation into those police statements that I told you about. Basically, so do you remember Avon or Tupperware? And you know how, like, the Avon lady or Tupperware, and actually, I sold Tupperware when I was a very young single mother. you go and you do these parties and you recruit new Tupperware ladies or
Mm-hmm.
Avon, right? When
Yeah.
when as an Avon lady, you bring in more Avon ladies, you get a cut and you get, increased stature. In the case of Tupperware, if you bring in enough, you get a car, which I did. So,
Wow.
so maybe that's why I recognized it as an MLM, which stands for multi-level marketing, because with Epstein, he had certain girls who would go out and bring their friends in to give him massages. And the girls who recruited more girls were paid $200 to $300 for each girl they brought. And the girl they brought was also paid $200 to $300 every time.
Mm. So
So
that's how he grew his flock or whatever. His
yeah, that's exactly how it happened. That and in these witness statements, you can see, let me call. So the primary recruiter in that particular group, let's call her Susan, which is not her real name. In every single other statement, and the police would say, well, how did you end up going to Epstein's? And the person would say, well, Susan came up to me, you know, Susan and I are friends. We're in the same friend group. And she asked me, hey, do you want to earn $200? All you have to do is massage this guy, give this guy a massage. And that is exactly how it happened. And so Susan would bring, let's say, Mary to Epstein's house. And Susan would get paid $200 or $300 for bringing Mary. And then Mary would also get paid $200 or $300.
when you say his house, are you talking about the one in St. James or
The one in Florida.
Florida?
Right. So I at one point I said to someone that it was kind of like Sweet Valley High, which was a young adult series of books a long time ago, or maybe The Babysitter's Club, only it was a very perverse one, right? They all went to the same high school. They were all in the same clique in this high school. And so all of those friends is what, from whom Susan drew, you know, not everyone wanted to do it, but, I mean, when you're in high school, especially back then, this was, the early 2000s, $200 in cash, that's pretty hard to pass
Oh,
up.
yeah,
And Susan would
especially for a
tell,
teenager. Yeah.
yeah. And Susan would tell them, you don't have to take your clothes off. He might ask you to do it, but if you just say no, he won't push you. And in fact, for most of those victim testimonies, that turned out to be their testimony, that he would, say, why don't you get more comfortable, take your clothes off or whatever. And if they said no, he didn't push it. But for some of them, he still tried to touch them, like through their clothes, or tried to cajole them to take their clothes off. Um, but anyway, that's how that worked. And to me, that's multi-level marketing. That's, you get recruited, and then you get incentivized to recruit more people.
Hmm. What was his end game to do that? I mean, just to get a massage. I'm sure he had other ideas for the girls.
There is credible evidence that he was sharing some of the girls with his friends. The end game for him personally was, I mean, it's hard to get inside his head, of course, but the evidence is that he'd always start on his belly, right? So Sarah Kellen was one of his assistants, and she would bring the girl up to the massage room, and he would then come in wearing a towel around his waist, and he would lay down face down on the massage table, and he would tell the girl which lotion to use, and work on his calves or whatever. But the evidence also shows that sometimes he would then turn over and he would self-gratify while the girl was performing the massage. Other times he would also attempt to touch the girl or use a vibrator on the girl, again, while he was self-gratifying. And the girls were told, if he asks you how old you are, say you are 18. Now, interestingly, some of the files that I have found, and these are files that no one has seen, they are not redacted, that I've been able to find. Some of them include his notes to either himself or his attorneys about things that he thought should be brought up during his trial or pre-trial. And one of the interesting notes was that the girls being told that if he asks, they should say that they're 18. He said proves that he didn't want anything to do with underage girls because he wanted to be told they were 18. Of course, that doesn't hold water because we all know that he was having them be recruited from a high school. But it was an interesting note to see.
You said in our prior conversation about the victims wasn't the main story; they were like a side hustle.
So one of the other things I've found, and this is all up on my, in the posts at the Notes from the Front site, which I should add is completely free to subscribe. There is a paid version, and what that gets you is I include all the source documents. But, people don't need to sign up for that. They can just sign up for the articles. And, and so one of the things that I found was a 3-hour audio, a secret recording of a 3-hour dinner with Epstein, Ehud Barak, who at the time was the sitting defense minister of Israel, and Larry Summers, who had been the Secretary of the Treasury. And during this secret conversation and the secret recording of it, girls were never mentioned at all. What was mentioned and what this 3-hour recording, which I transcribed and sent the transcription to, through Notes from the Front, and also we did a live broadcast with the investigative journalist Zev Shalev, and we together did a recording having to do with this. What they were talking about is how, and it makes so clear that's what these people are doing and still doing, how they are manipulating world economies, manipulating the governments of countries around the world, defense mechanisms. These are people who are holding the strings. They're like the puppeteers, and these countries and the governments of these countries are the puppets. That's the real story. That's the real reality of what some people now call the Epstein class, but the global elites are doing behind closed doors. The girls, the victims of trafficking, it's very real. But it's not the big story about what is happening behind the closed doors among these people who are making decisions, who are pulling the strings politically, and are still doing it. Epstein.
So he was using the girls, to get leverage over these leaders and important
I
people
think
to.
I think that I don't know that he was using them specifically to get the leverage, but it was certainly a happy outcome that he had that leverage. The current thinking is that, so Glenn Maxwell, her father, Robert Maxwell, was notorious for being involved in a lot of fraud, a lot of he's thought to have been a double, maybe even a triple agent, so for Russia, Israel, and the UK. And it is thought, and he died in a not at all suspicious accident where he
No,
fell off his yacht.
it happens every day.
It really does. And it is thought by people in the know, and I think it's probably accurate, that Ghislaine Maxwell basically took over Daddy's operations. And she partnered with or groomed Epstein. And that is how Epstein came to be involved in these various dealings, both with the girls and these other things. And I want to point out that I know this all sounds like crazy conspiracy theory, and I thought the same thing in the beginning, but there are a lot of theories, and one of them is probably true, and this seems like the one that is most likely to be true. And I want to point out that during that secret dinner, you have the sitting Minister of Defense of Israel, also the former Prime Minister of Israel, he was both, sharing with Epstein a lot of confidential information, which means that at very least he considered Epstein an asset, or he would not have been there sharing these things that he's sharing during this dinner, which leads to Epstein's death. And what I mean by that is, if you are an asset for an agency or government of a country, you pretty much know that if you get caught, you are going to either get taken out or you take yourself out.
What do you think happened? Did he take himself out, or do you think he was taken out?
I don't know, but I am reasonably confident. There's, of course, the theories that he's still alive walking around somewhere. And I want to point out that, to that, some of the people with some of the conspiracy theories point to the quote unquote fact that supposedly Epstein did not have a prostate. And during the autopsy, there was a prostate. But we know from many of the victims' statements that when Epstein would flip over on the massage table and pleasure himself, number one, he was able to become excited. And number two, he would need to clean himself up afterwards. And men without a prostate, generally speaking, are not able to do that, let alone come to completion. So he had a prostate. Either that or he was very unusual in having that ability.
Well,
I apologize. I'm trying to be very delicate.
That's fine. Well, we know he's very unusual in many different ways.
Well, that's true. That is true.
That's true. Well, you mentioned something about justice for victims. What does that actually mean?
So a lot of people, rightly so, demand justice for the victims.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they don't have any idea what they really mean. And when challenged, they don't really know. It's become a trope, but if you understand the legal system, probably quote unquote justice for the victims is very different than if they stop and think a minute what these people mean when they say that. You know, a large number of the victims have received money from the Victims' Compensation Fund. What else, that our legal system, that's, the way our legal system is set up is that money is the compensation. And so I challenge people to really think about what they mean when they say justice for the victims. Now, some people say, well, people need to be arrested. Well, the primary perpetrators were arrested. That's Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the people that the victims say raped them, choked them, who are still alive, the problem with having them arrested is you need actual evidence. This is one of the reasons that trafficking is so difficult to prosecute, because you need actual evidence. Now, if you have the evidence of someone taking someone, underage across state lines, that is evidence.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to have that evidence. And victim testimony alone isn't going to get you, usually, to a criminal conclusion, to a conviction. It might, but it's very hard to do. Now, just very recently, some of the victims filed a lawsuit against Wexner. And I think that is really going to be the way to go. If the victims feel that they have not received justice otherwise, then filing lawsuits against their abusers, civil lawsuits, is the way to go. But again, it requires victim testimony. It requires them to get on the stand. It requires it because in our country, the accused has a right to confront their accuser. And again, this is one of the reasons that trafficking and sex crimes in general are so underreported and so under prosecuted, because the perpetrators know that the victim doesn't want to get up and talk about that. It's very humiliating. It's very traumatic. So all of that needs to come into the thought process when someone says justice for the victims.
I know that's a lot of talk out there about, why there's no arrest. People claiming all these, these reports about, ledgers about all these famous and important people flying on his jet, going to his island, why are these people not being arrested? And, supposedly there's pictures out there of several different, important people.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to name any names, but, because, you don't know what is true and what is not. Because of AI, you can, doctor up pictures of anybody and
Right.
put them in any situation nowadays. So, you got to be careful about, these pictures of these famous people supposedly
Right.
at Epstein Island. You don't know for sure if that's a made up picture or a real picture.
So here's the thing. What's going to take these people down is not the victim accusations. If justice for the victim is considered to be or viewed as anything that takes these people down, just them getting taken down, then that is much more feasible. Because what's going to take these people down is financial crimes. We have so much evidence now of money laundering. That's part of what tests is really good at. And also just being removed. Not necessarily the legal system, which again, our legal system is set up so that for a prosecution, they need to be able to confront the witness. But to be taken, to be removed. And what I'm saying, for example, Howard Lutnick. Howard Lutnick absolutely was way more involved with Epstein than he has ever said. Did he ever abuse a little, a girl? I see no evidence of that. But I see a lot of evidence of him having lied about his relationship with Epstein, now to Congress, and they're starting to call for him to either resign or be removed. That may be, with respect to some of the people, the only quote unquote justice, that they are exposed, that they are removed from their powerful offices. The other countries, for example, the UK, they did an amazing job with, what's his name, Mandelson. And, once it came out, he was done. Prince Andrew also, stripped of his royal title. So other countries have done, again, that's not a criminal prosecution, but it's a falling from grace. Is it enough? It may have to be for some of these people. On the other hand, through tests, I have personally discovered a perpetrator who is still living, who trafficked a girl to Zorro Ranch, according to the girl.
Now, what is this Zorro Ranch?
The Zorro Ranch is one of Epstein's properties. It's his New Mexico property. And there was trafficking going on there as well. And, the authorities now have the identity of that perpetrator. It may or may not lead to anything, but they are at least an identified living person of interest. And in that particular case, hopefully there will be an arrest and a prosecution.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So again, to go back to your original question, what justice for the victims looks like, it means different things to different people. And I think ultimately the people who get to decide what it means are the victims.
I think a lot of people out there want them to be hung from the gallows and public executions and all like that, which, that's probably not going to happen. Like you said, just the fall from grace is probably the worst that's going to happen to most of them.
Well, and fall from grace and also potentially bankrupted.
Yeah, financial. Yeah,
exactly.
And that can be worse for some of them than death.
That's true. That's very true.
Lose their power and money and influence. That would be sure death for them.
Right, and also
in their eyes.
Yes, absolutely. Also, though, if they are perjuring themselves in civil suits, that can ultimately lead to jail time.
So that's one of the biggest things I think I hear out there is why there's no arrest.
Right.
Why is nobody being held responsible? Well, to me, it's a long process. You can't just, run out there and start arresting people, especially people, have a lot of influence and a lot of power. It's harder to take someone down like that than just your normal John Doe out there that's doing this stuff, because, they have a lot of power. They have their attorneys, a lot of money to back their story. So, the more powerful a person is, the harder I think it is to bring them down.
Well, because they know how to use the legal system to their advantage to
Exactly.
protect them, and they have the resources to hire really good attorneys and a whole group of attorneys, and absolutely. But also, again, I think it is really important to remember that the people who were really running the particular Epstein machine in terms of the girls did get arrested. And one of them is dead. He died in jail, and the other one is still in jail, even though she's trying like crazy to get out of it.
Yeah. You think she'll get out?
I don't think that she has a good chance, but I'm not going to say she has no chance.
You think she'll maybe work out a deal that if she spills the beans on everything, that they may at least give her an easier sentence?
I have to think she's already actually spilled all the beans that she has.
You think so?
Well, otherwise, wouldn't you do anything you could to stay out of jail, out of prison? So well, I think that she has likely spilled all the beans that she can without putting herself at risk of being taken out.
When you say taken out, you mean
I mean,
suicide?
yeah, 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 falling off a yacht.
Falling
Which,
off a yacht?
which, by the way, the yacht that her dad fell off of was named after her. It was the Lady
Hmm.
Glenn.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, I mean, these are
Yeah, maybe.
powerful, dark people,
Oh, yeah.
and
Very
they're
dark.
and
Very
they,
powerful.
yep, and they are calling the shots in our country to some extent, and in other countries.
Yeah, I've heard one rumor or theory that they're not releasing the names where the government can use the information to blackmail them,
Could be.
and could be. I mean, I think anything could be possible. Well, you said something about the Epstein's death stopped nothing. That the big story is still going on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it has to be. When you look at who actually, if you just simply look at what's going on right now, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, in our country here, you are seeing that sort of manipulation and power unfold in real time. And you see people who we knew to have been know to have been within Epstein's sphere in some of the highest positions in our country. Again, Lutnick. And Maxwell actually said when she had that in prison interview with Todd Blanche, she actually said the people who were involved in this, quote, as your friends, some of them are in your cabinet. Now, I'm positive she was referring to Lutnick, but potentially others as well, because she said some of them, not one of them. Now, other people say, well, yeah, but she lies all the time. I was like, I know for a fact Lutnick. So she wasn't lying there.
Why do you think there's so much redaction going on in the files? I can understand that the victims, their names and things like that, but yeah, I've not looked at any of the files or information, but from what I've seen and heard, I mean everything. There's more redaction than there is actual statements.
Yeah. So, first of all, there are millions and millions and millions and millions of pages, right? There's millions of documents, and many of those documents are, many pages. There is zero way that anyone was manually going through each of those documents. So a lot of it was computer redaction, and the algorithm being overbroad, or, for example, if a victim's name was Susan,
Mm-hmm.
and the computer was keying on, SUS, and it happened that the word, it was actually the word sustain, it would still get redacted. Just like, we all know that in our word processing programs, you can do a search and replace, and you can do a search and replace for everything that matches whatever term you put in. And sometimes it will replace the wrong thing.
Mm-hmm.
So a whole lot of it was over redaction based on names they actually put in. But I'm also pretty sure that there were some manual checks for particularly sensitive names.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And a lot of the documents have huge blocks of redaction, just like it's a whole block. And, I'm sure that is also sort of being overly zealous with, a string of words or referring to a particular incident. And so the whole paragraph gets blocked, or even the whole page gets blocked. And yet, we have that now famous or infamous FBI slideshow where they're doing their presentation on the incidents of interest and people of interest that they are following up. And that's completely unredacted. Trump is in there, so it was just very sloppy. On the other hand, I do have to say that it also was an almost insurmountable task, given the breadth of and scope of what they were dealing with, and the sheer number of files. So I would say that at least some of it is the result of incompetence versus malice, but maybe not all of it.
Why didn't, this is another question and comment I hear a lot, why didn't the previous administration release all this information? I mean, it's been out there for years.
I honestly don't know. I don't know whether, I can guess that it wasn't ripe yet. They were still doing investigation, that it would have compromised the investigation, or it just wasn't a priority, or the right people didn't know to bring it forward. I honestly don't know. There may be people who do know, but I do not.
Because, Trump's always been brought up as been involved in it in some way. And people say, if Trump was guilty, then the previous administration would have released it and, before the election to, keep him from getting elected. So,
Mm-hmm.
and then other people say, well, since they didn't use that against him, then he was innocent of any wrongdoing. People say, you see pictures of Trump and Clinton and several people with Epstein. And they're saying, see, they both were friends with Epstein, which, just because you're at a party with somebody don't mean you're friends with them. But then again, who knows?
Right.
Who knows what the depth of their friendships or their meetings with
Right. Right. Here's one of the things that I believe based on the files that I've seen. When Trump says that he had no contact with Epstein since whatever year it was he said that about, I believe that it is likely true that he had no direct contact with Epstein. But I know for a fact from files and emails I've seen that messages were getting back and forth between the two of them through an intermediary. So both things can be true. Technically speaking, it's quite likely true that Trump had no direct contact with Epstein after a certain year. But it's also true that messages were being communicated to Trump from Trump or, one of his people through an intermediary back to Epstein.
Yeah, you see a lot of pictures out there, Clinton and some others, and they make the comments, well, we've never met him before, but yet you see pictures of different people supposedly at the island in hot tubs and posing with them. But, again, we talked about earlier, they could be AI generated. So
yeah, absolutely.
So it's hard to tell what is real out there, what pictures are real and what are fake. And I guess the authorities have the real pictures, and I don't know if any of the pictures have been released to the public.
Well, I guess that depends on what you mean by the pictures and what you mean by released, and even what you mean by the public. I know I'm sounding like a lawyer because, but
Well, you are a
again,
lawyer.
right, there have been pictures in the files that have been released. So, but there's also allegedly an entire trove of hard drives that have video and pictures on them that no one seems to know exactly where they are now, and those have not been released. So, I actually, in my private Dropbox, which also is available to my members, my Substack members, we have a whole directory full of videos, but they are not, so far as I've seen, the videos that people really want to know about. They're not the ones that were recorded on his closed circuit TV in his Palm Springs, Florida house. They are videos of the police actions as they're walking through his house with their search warrant and video. They're fairly innocuous.
What about the rumors of human sacrificing and cannibalism? That's something that's really got a lot of people stirred up. And
I mean, I don't believe them. I have seen the statements made to the FBI that include those, and they, taken in the context of the whole statements, they just don't pass the sniff test for me. When I was in litigation, specifically, I often dealt with people who probably believed what they were saying that would make allegations like that. And I hasten to add, my litigation practice was not in this kind of context. But I certainly saw my share of statements that, if they seem really far-fetched, you kind of have to look at the context. And if the rest of the context seems pretty credible, then those allegations also carry more weight. But if the rest of the context is also things that are just so fanciful, you know, you never want to dismiss something out of hand, and I don't. But I think those allegations are pretty unlikely. Not saying for sure, but the sniff test.
All these lists that's been coming out since day one, which I didn't believe half of the names that were put out because right when this first broke, you had a list of hundreds of people names that were on the list of visiting the island that's flown on this jet. Has any of that true? Has any real list been released with names on them, or is this just more propaganda? One side trying to, get traction on the other side to, use it.
Yes, to all of the above. I mean, there are a lot of names in those files, but that doesn't mean they did anything wrong. It's not anything wrong to fly on someone's private jet.
No, but
It's not anything wrong to visit their private island. And of course, he threw a lot of social functions, and he was invited to a lot of social functions. I think where the issue comes in, first of all, is when they lie about it. Like, I did not visit the island. Well, yeah, what about that time that you were there with your family? If they start lying about it, then that's where you think there must be something more to this, because they're trying to cover something up. But sure, there are a lot of people who are named as, being invited to a party or, some other social function. Or, Epstein was really someone who liked to glad hat around with people that were, well known or influential. And that doesn't mean that they had any idea what he was up to. Now, where I take more issue is the people who were socializing with him or in business with him or transacting with him after he got out of jail in Florida. At that point, he was a convicted, acknowledged sex offender.
Right.
And there's no way they didn't know that. Now, sure, you can say, well, people deserve a second chance. He was rehabilitated. Well, he certainly wasn't rehabilitated, obviously. But that's where I start. I think I have a sort of a soft line that I draw there of like, well, you know what? You knew what he was in for. You knew that he admitted it, at least to one count. And you're still hanging out with him. Like, that just doesn't seem right.
Yeah. Once a person has been convicted of that, if you continue to hang out with them, then you're going to be at one point brought into a web of crime. And whether you know about it and still do it and still hang out with them or participating, that's something that is going to be questionable.
Yeah.
Anything else that you want to mention about the whole? Do you think it'll ever get totally resolved, or do you think it'll be eventually people will maybe forget about it? And
I think that most of everything will eventually come out, but not in my lifetime. I
really,
think maybe 20 years from now. Yeah. Well,
you
maybe
think it's
that
going
might
to
be
be
my lifetime if I'm lucky.
You think it's going to take that long to get all the answers and get everything?
Yeah, I do. Everything, including like what we've talked about, not just the victims. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think the victims that can ever get justice. I mean, we talked about that, before, that, physical scars you can get over, but the emotional scars you never get over. And that's something that will always be with the victims in some shape, form, or fashion. And that's something that there's no way of getting justice for that. Said most of the perpetrators, to fall from grace and financial ruin, probably the worst that's going to happen to them. And there'll be probably very few of them that will spend time in jail unless they get into lying under oath and perjury. That they may get them, sort of backdoor them into to something else that
And
they can get them
financial.
on.
Remember Capone. Remember
Oh
that.
yeah.
So I have another engagement that I need to get
Okay.
to.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time. Very informative, and look forward to following you. And I've been reading some of your emails that come out, and hopefully we can grow your following.
Well, that's very kind of you, and likewise. And thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored.
All right. Well, thank you for sharing everything with us. It was very informative.
My pleasure.
That's it for our show for today. Thank you for joining in. I hope you were able to learn something today that may help you understand what is going on around you, allowing you to be aware of the dangers to yourself and perhaps a loved one, and maybe inspire you to get involved in the fight to stop human trafficking. Please follow me on Facebook, subscribe to my podcast, email me at davidjstory.com with your questions or comments. Music by tunereel.com. And please remember, always watch your six and others too.